Hey, how's it going, everyone? Just doing a part two to my lesson on the seven heads and 10 horns, and just continuing on in Revelation 17, where there's another reference to it. And so this to me is amazing. Just seeing the continuity in this power structure, which existed during the time of Christ in Revelation 12, ready to quote unquote receive him, ultimately work to crucify him, and then continuing on until the end days. And then Revelation 13, it talks about it having the objective to, implement the mark of the beast. And then here in Revelation 17, it's talking about America. And so it's central to the entire book of Revelation. And really it is clear that it's been central to being part of God's left-hand side throughout human history. So it's amazing. So, my position, I want people to understand, I would say there's some sort of flexibility here, in the sense that I believe that this could be layered in terms of these seven heads and 10 horns being symbolic of other things. But my teaching fundamentally is that the power structure in the last days is a one world government of all nations, including Israel. A lot of Israelites working for the beast, and then chilling for the beast, and then taking the mark of the beast, and then being destroyed, ultimately with fire. And that's body and soul. That's a permanent destruction. So even majority of God's chosen people are going to be destroyed, for sure. And so obviously the 144,000 is the exception. And then there will be some righteous Israelites who will refuse the mark of the beast, and then they'll be part of the mixed multitude. So there is a group called the mixed multitude from all nations that, will not worship, this beast, which, like I said, has existed throughout human history. So, but ultimately all nations on earth are aligned with, that beast, and ultimately compose and make up that beast. And so these seven heads, my teaching is that it's symbolic, of these pillars. And then here this is why I did this lesson in Revelation 17, and it gives us a better understanding of how they're the major power structures throughout human history. And then these 10 horns, which I am teaching that they're on every one of the heads, is representative of the 70 nations in the Bible post flood. And so they're God's entire left-hand side. And so this whore, this scarlet-colored, this woman sitting on this scarlet-colored beast in the last days is described as scarlet-colored, with like an evil, objective, is America. And so, it's going to be underpinned by all nations. And so that's why it's important to understand that this beast, scarlet-colored beast, full of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns, I'll read this whole chapter, but is reflective of God's entire left-hand side. All nations on earth are in alignment with the shape of the earth, and then this narrative, and then ultimately to fight against God, when he returns. So it has to represent the one world government, and then they had a king over them, Revelation 9:11, and then that's when this beast rose up again in the last days. Okay, it's a one world government. And this is the way that God decided to, declare to us that, how it will look, and so it's a visual. It's meant to be cryptic and encoded really, and then it's meant to sound ridiculous for anybody who's reading this. Will be like, what are you talking about? Like, where are the beasts and all that kind of stuff? Like, they won't get it, because they believe all of this is normal. They're going to be eating and drinking, and giving into marriage during the time when Christ will return. But God's elect are going to be very, very aware that these words are happening right before our very eyes. So it's only for a few to see, and hear. Those who have an ear, let him hear. That kind of thing. So I'll go through Revelation 17. It's, again, the same structure. So it's interesting. It just describes slightly differently. And then there's a new character involved. And so, I'll go through Revelation 17. And there came one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. So right away, we see the parallelism with God's right and left-hand side. Here we have 7 angels, and then we have 7 heads. So there's always a mirror. Verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And so we can see already we're getting clues of what this whore is all about, and what influence that she has. And they have to have broad reach, across the entire earth. Verse 3, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy. And so we see that same language, again, I refer to my lesson that I'll link below on Revelation 13. And so this structure is going to be blaspheming God, either removing God or then actively blaspheming it. And so that's, again, this is the same structure that's described here, Revelation 13:1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. So it's the same structure in the last days that's implementing this mark of the beast. And this is headquartered in America. So that's very, very important to know that the language is consistent. You know, Revelation 13 and Revelation 17 are very much related. Verse 4, and the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color. That just shows that it has rulership, you know, and power over the entire earth, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. So a golden cup in her hand, so it's like raising it up. It's like proud of it. It's the complete inversion, you know, of what God would want. So it just, again, gives us clues as to who this is. Verse 5, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. So we'd have to look to understand what this place is in Revelation 17 and 18 is look at the common denominator, the source of all the abominations on the earth. And it could not be more obvious that this is America. Verse 6, and I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And so we again see that, you know, this is a reference as well to America. And then it's going to be a place where there's a concentration of God's people, Israelites, the saints. Verse 7, and the angel said unto me, wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, with which the 7 heads, which have the 7 heads and 10 horns. So just so people understand my interpretation. So if you say like, there's 5 people and I saw 5 people in a pair of glasses. Okay, there's no reason just in terms of grammar to not potentially apply those pair of glasses to all people or all the, people's heads. Okay, so it's not wrong just grammatically because it's not clear, what's whether it's 7 heads with 10 horns, on each of the 7 heads and 10 horns. So it's not clear actually just in terms of language. And I believe it's done this way on purpose to potentially provide double meaning as well. And so in the very least, double meaning. So there's no reason grammatically you can't make an assumption, interpretation that all of the 7 heads have 10 horns because the text doesn't say, on each of the 7 heads were 10 horns or on a separate, it's not even on the 7 heads. It's on one of the heads. We don't know. Okay. Like just from what it says, which have the 7 heads and 10 horns. Usually a horn is on a head. Okay. Like the devil horns and all that kind of stuff. So, or on like an animal. So we wouldn't think that it's 7 heads and then like 10 horns off to the side or something like that. So we would assume that the horns are on the heads, and then there's no reason to not be allowed to at least assume that each of the heads have that too. So that's where I get the 70 horns, and then that's where I get the 70 nations, post-flood. And so every nation on this earth is ultimately blaspheming God, except for a few in all those nations, including the Israel, so it's the same. So there's, of all the billions of souls on this earth, not many of them, are on God's right-hand side. So I think that everybody knows that at this point. Verse 8, the beast that thou sawest was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. That's again consistent with Revelation 9:11, where they had a king over them. And then that event was essentially their ceremony to usher it in and make it visible to us, even though it's been active throughout this whole time, whether passively or actively, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. And so initially John the Revelator seeing some, movie playing out in the heavens in Revelation 12, then he sees this thing rising up out of the sea in Revelation 13. And so it's showing that it's being reborn. It's come from above initially, from the heavens, from God, because he provides all the souls, every soul on earth. And then it's in this earth realm, but then it's being rebuilt up, okay, in Revelation 13, and then consistent with this in Revelation 17, because it's the same time period. So it also supports reincarnation of all those souls. And they that dwell on the earth, so it has to be a worldwide power structure, shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. So that's supporting reincarnation. And here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. So mountains are usually power structures, okay? And so this is starting to give us a clue about what these pillars are. And then this is the same, very, very similar language to Revelation 13:2, which again, all these things are related. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the feet of a lion. And the dragon gave him power. So those are language that's used to describe the power structures in history, in Daniel. And so now we're getting to see what the underpinning of these heads are. And we're given clues here how that is. I'll read that again. And there were 7 kings. I'll read 9 again. And here is the mind that hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Okay. And there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And so that's this final one world structure. And so we need to understand, well, what are those 5, that are in the past? Those would be the Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Medo-Persian, and Greece. And the one that is Rome, okay, during the time that this book is being written. And the one that is to come is, America, in this final one world order power structure with America, essentially the revived Roman Empire, okay? That's why you see all the same, like, Roman structures, even here in downtown Houston, and then in Washington, D.C. and all that. And Russian Vids was one of the many channels, I suspect, that talk about that. So you see the architecture everywhere. And then just in terms of the way, like, our sports and political stuff, it's the same, okay? So that's what it means when it said, and there are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, which I just read. 1 is Rome, and the other is yet to come, okay? And so we see what those 7 heads represent, okay? The pillars. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space, okay? And so this one world order officially only has from 9/11 going onwards till the end. So it's a relatively short power structure time that power structure can do what it needs to do, which is implement the mark of the beast, okay? And so that was the beginning of it. And so they're ultimately like just everybody's working together, all the governments worldwide. And then we see that with the flat stationary earth, and then the narrative that's going on now, and then the financial manipulation and everything really. The military industrial complex as well, for sure. Because they're actually preparing to fight against God, not one another. They're just testing it out on one another. Verse 11, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7th that goeth into perdition. So this is like, it's almost like saying, like, it's not officially one, but it's like the last one is going to be all together. And so the one that is the 7th is America, but ultimately there is one that's 8th and is of the 7 and goes into perdition. So it's like America is the 7th, but then they're all going to be effectively one, and so, that's why it says, and is of the 7th. So it's all of them together. So all the historical power structures, the Medes, the Babylonians, all the ones that I just read, the Egyptians, all those kings, their souls still exist, okay? And then they're reborn. And then now they're the king of modern day, Iran, modern day Medes, and the modern day Egypt and all that kind of stuff, okay? So all those souls don't just go away. And so they're all reborn. And then now they're all ultimately working together. And that's what it says here. Even he is the 8th and is of the 7 and go into perdition. So the quote, son of perdition is this one world government, okay? God's entire left-hand side. That's the quote, son of perdition, for people who want understanding on that. That's very, very clear. I'll read that again. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7 and goeth into perdition. And so their job is to go and get everybody's mark of the beast or destroy, those who don't align with that. Verse 12, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as of yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. And so these have to be the actual, like, people, okay? It's actual kings, okay? And like governors and rulers. And so this again is why I don't believe that this is actually just 10 kings or like a G10 or anything like that, because there are many, like, quote unquote kings, on this earth. And so ultimately all those spirits who are ahead of all those, 70 nations post Noah, they have a leader, and then that's reflective of, like, all those kings, and then those souls are still in existence. They just get reborn into bodies in the modern day. And then, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. And that 1 hour is the hour of temptation, where God's going to try the entire earth, and so we see that in Revelation 3. And so that language is consistent. And so it's a relatively brief time of 1260 days, the wrath of God. And so, just know that language of 1 hour is consistent with Revelation 3 as well. And so the horns now represent kings, represent nations, like actual people. And so they're not like historical power structures or anything like that. So, this is, again, to me, very clever language, but ultimately it's describing a consolidation of all the historical power structures and then all the people, all the actual individual nations on earth in the last days. So it covers everybody. Verse 13, this is also very, very important, which is why I know that ultimately I would say my breakdown is correct. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. And so it's a one world government. It's everybody, essentially, except a very, very small portion. Verse 14, these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. That's in verse 14. That's with his elect. And so they're all going to ultimately work against fighting God. So your person that if you've taken the mark of the beast, that person is ultimately fighting against God. Okay, they're not fighting against you and me. They're God's enemy. Okay, just know that. And so whether they know it or not, whether they shoot a missile in the sky, it doesn't matter. They're all part of that system and the beast system. So just know that. And so their job ultimately is to do what they've done in the past already in Revelation 12, but in the last days is to fight against God when he returns. Like it says here, these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. It's in the sky. Okay, Christ is not going to be reborn into a body or anything in the last days, out of a woman's womb. None of that. Okay, and so this is a battle in the sky. Okay, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. That's consistent with 1 Thessalonians 3:13, and really all my sequence videos. That I'll read that. It's important because the whole Bible links up. Second Ezra is a great book that goes into that, I would say, in a tremendous amount of detail. This battle of the multitude against God. 1 Thessalonians 3:13-33. To the end ye may establish your hearts unblameable in holiness before God, even our Father, at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ with all of his saints. And so that's the same as Revelation 17:14. Verse 15, and he saith unto me, these waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongue. And so this is this whore, okay, is going to be a amalgamation of people of different multitudes, of different languages, nations, and tongues. So it's going to be a melting pot. That again gives us a clue that it's America, and then it's at least double meaning where the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth, it's like this place has to have their presence everywhere with a navy, and that's obviously America. Vatican doesn't have a freaking navy or anything like that. There's no other country that has the money, first of all, to make vessels that will sit on waters worldwide except America. And so that also proves that it's America, this quote-unquote whore. Verse 16, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. And so this is essentially going to be the assembly of great nations that's described in Jeremiah. And so what's a nation in Bible language? It's people, okay? Which again, to me, is proof that those horns represent biblical nations, okay, not like land masses, that kind of thing. And so the nice thing about it is that, my interpretation, it covers both because it's the ancient Medes, because they're one of the heads, that these horns are on, and so it includes them, of course. And then it also has all the nations. So it essentially covers everybody. And so everybody's going to be in on it. They're going to be like, yeah, burn America. It's time. God's going to put it in their heart. Jeremiah 50 verse 9, for lo, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon assembly of great nations. Assembly of great nations from the north country, and they shall set themselves in array against her, and from thence she shall be taken. Their arrow shall be as of mighty expert man, none shall return in vain. So this could literally be like just all the countries with military power, just send it over. We know at least it's going to be Iran and China, because we see that in the news. So in North Korea. So, but most importantly, it's assembly of great nations. And so when the Bible is being written in Jeremiah's time, it's talking about nations of people. And so that's what I believe those 10 horns times 7 is the 70 nations. How this whole thing was, the foundation of it, post flood. And verse 17, for God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And so everybody's doing this. God's left-hand side, he controls them, according to Job 12:16 and many, many verses. And so they're just puppets. They're just actors. Verse 18, and the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. And so there's not just 10 kings on earth, okay, or anything like that. There's lots, okay? And so that also, it doesn't make sense that it's the G7 and the G10 or something like that. And G7 and G10 have overlapping nations, so it can't be that anyway. And so that doesn't make sense. And it's not Europe. You know, Europe would not be the first place that a person would think that's going to be involved in this destruction. The first places I would think are, like I said, the list, Iran, China, and North Korea. Okay. Like I read in Jeremiah 50 verse 9, from the North country. Okay, Europe's not like making like missiles and stuff. I'm not like obviously involved, and they're all part of these assembly of great nations, but they're not going to be the ones who are like, you know, the chief people behind this. You know, assembly of great nations from the North country, and they shall set themselves in array against her. So it's going to be even in the water, you know, I suspect as well. So it's going to be literally surrounded. So those other interpretations really don't make sense. So the 7 heads and 10 horns ultimately have to refer to the one world power structure, because that's what's happening. It's essentially being coalesced, consolidated, and then but it's existed from earlier. It's just there's more people. Okay, those kingdoms were smaller now in the past in Revelation 12, and they've just grown because they've had kids. Okay, and like they've expanded, and there's more people presumably growing, you know, increasing the population of the earth. But the root of them is the 70 nations, you know, after the flood. And so, but you know, it's just all those people, you know, and then they have the kings over them, which is again symbolic here of the 7 heads and 10 horns. And then but they're all aligned, okay, except for small portions of people, you know, within all those nations, including Israel. So it makes sense. So that's my understanding, again, of just going through Revelation 17, just to kind of go through this, because it also talks about the 7 heads and 10 horns. And so ultimately, the only interpretation that makes sense of the 7 heads and 10 horns has to involve nations, in my opinion, because that's the way the Bible speaks of nations everywhere as groups of people, groups of souls, not like, you know, Europe or France or anything like that. And then it has to talk about a one world structure, because first and foremost, we see that. Just for, if you're a flat earther, you get that for free. So you can almost work backwards and you know exactly what it is. But it makes sense. And so that's the 7 heads and 10 horns as well. That's my understanding of Revelation 17. Hope everyone's doing well. Bye.